Arrow, you can. Well, I'm not seeing my picture. I don't know what I'm doing wrong with that.
So what we have here now is the week 9 for the core class, and we have a guest with us, Mr. Aidan Kelley, who is going to help us get to the origins and of Samhain, and that's what it's all about. So it's kind of, this class is kind of a continuation of Gaelic mythology in connection with Samhain in review. But before we do that, Sophia, all the way from England in the UK across the pond, wanted to touch on something that we were talking about a week ago, or a week or two ago, where he was she was talking about, excuse me, we didn't cover the origin of a craft name and origins of a craft name, purpose of a craft name used within a circle by coven members. She said that in the old days, the coven would have neighbors and relatives, so craft name was not to hide their identity, their legal name. Also considering that in the past, there were few personal first names. So having a unique craft name, only one related to the person's character, must be uniquely identity. That person in magic spells and on the non-physical levels, astral, space, higher, middle, lower, and past times, present, future. And then she goes on about naming yourself after a deity as a craft name. And then she states human ego inflation. When we want assistance or contact with a deity, we use their unique, meaningful name. It would not be appropriate to name a person the same as a deity, therefore causing confusion when performing a ritual magic, traveling on non-physical levels. Sophia, you there?
Yes, I certainly am.
Can you reiterate on some of those points right there? I especially like the part where it talks about human ego inflation. I definitely can resonate with that, because that's an interesting topic.
Yeah. So I don't actually know how long ago craft names started, but I'm assuming that they were possibly around during what's called the burning times, the medieval times. And yeah, so you'd have very few first names. They'd be from the Bible, or they'd be related to aristocracy, royalty. And then family names, well, your family wouldn't move very far away. So, a Smith could have half a dozen houses in that same village, because as they grow up, they move out and move into another little hut. And, so there's only sort of 5 or 6 family names in a village. So, in order for those people to be unique in magical spells and on the non-physical plane, they would need a very unique name, somehow relating to their character, to be able to distinguish that person from, Mary Smith, who lived by the fish pond, from Mary Smith, who lived by the woods. And my second point was that it would be egotistical to name yourself after a deity. And I don't think that would have happened, because there would have been too much respect for the deity, and recognizing that the deity is not the same substance as a human.
Right.
Those were just my thoughts.
I mean, they're definitely relevant thoughts. And I head over heels. When you get ego intertwined with your path, I think it's always good to take a look at the bigger picture. It sure is. And I have people in the core class trying to come in, and I'm trying to Get them on camera. Okay, here we have Sarah. Okay, sorry about that, Sarah. We have got you on. Mr. Kelley, are you there? He is muted. We're going to unmute him. Here we go. Mr. Kelley, you have to unmute your microphone, and then we can hear you. There we go. Aidan, Kelley, can you hear us now?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So thank you so much for coming on the core class tonight. It's a pleasure to have you on. For somebody that's been involved in craft communities since late 60s, 70s, all the way up to modern times. So it's definitely an honor to have you on. When we're talking about the origins of Samhain, where does that come from?
Yeah. It's complicated. A number of tracks that intersected. Also, my situation is my wife Melinda died at 1 a.m. This past Friday.
Wow.
We knew it was coming. She had a brain tumor. It was only diagnosed back in February. But her death was sudden, so I'm definitely still processing that. And being able to talk about Samhain and the time when can most easily contact the spirits really fits together here. So I will do my best not to be maudlin. I'm finding ways to process my feelings, discovering feelings I didn't know were there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's definitely going to affect what I have to say.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Samhain spelled Samhain, and one criterion we use to spot a newcomer is that we'll use it as Samhain.
Mm-hmm.
It's pronounced Samhain because the Irish spelling hasn't been updated recently. It has been several times in the past. And Samhain is actually the name of the month that we call November.
Mm-hmm.
Just as Beltane is the name for the month we call May. But here, Beltane's pronunciation is actually Bealchin in Irish.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this weird thing of pronouncing one name correctly and one name not correctly. So Samhain as the feast at the beginning of the month was always, as far as I know, the feast of the ancestors. Because in Irish culture, Samhain began the year. And so you would honor them, just as in the Roman calendar. At the end of February, you had the Feast of the Ancestors. But the fact that February was the last month means that all of the difficulties in the calendar were combed down to the end, which is why February is only 28 days in our calendar. It varied. Some Februarys in the Roman calendar had an extra 22 days thrown into them. It had all kinds of weirdnesses, which is one of the reasons why Julius Caesar, because he had the power to do it, straightened out the calendar into the kind of calendar we have now. Mm-hmm. The other strangeness about Samhain is that in the Roman Catholic Church, in the calendar of saints, originally, or earlier, the Feast of All Saints was in the middle of May. And when the Roman culture began interacting with the Irish culture after about the year 600, the church discovered it could not get people to celebrate the saints in the middle of May. They insisted on doing it at Samhain in the beginning of November. And they gave up and transferred what was the official Feast of All Saints onto November 1st. I don't remember exactly which century that it was in, but yeah, more or less around the year 1000.
Is Samhain one of the harvest festivals?
No, hardest in what sense?
No, is it one of the harvest festivals?
Oh,
Samhain?
harvest. Not really. By that time, it's too cold.
So it's not a harvest festival.
No. The
You see,
harvest
I would disagree with you.
I would too.
Okay.
With all
Okay.
respect, Aidan. And I'm a fan of yours. But certainly in England, and I believe across in Ireland as well, it is the start of a lot of culling of domestic animals because they will not make it through the winter because they're old or they've
Yeah.
fallen ill or they're injured.
Right. Right.
And so they would slaughter those in order to salt them down to preserve them for the winter. And of course, it's the start of not having a lot of food available. Therefore, you go to your stores and you hunt whatever you can.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So here it is a harvest of the flesh of meat.
Yeah, that's true. Also, trying to remember those details. I think Samhain would have been, yes, the last harvest in the sense of to harvest of pumpkins
Mhm.
and like that. But there, some of the more hardy types of vegetables.
What
Yeah,
about Mr. Kelley? Do you feel that the origins of Samhain in the early days, when Samhain was just becoming a tradition of Ireland, a tradition of the Scots, a tradition of the Britain Isles, when they lit bonfires, they made offerings to elementals like fairies and the ancestors, and other spirits who might cross over. The flame in the communal fire were lit time and time again. Was that a beacon? What was it used for? And why are the elementals so tied into ancestor spirits at all? And can ancestor spirits come in the forms of elementals, or is that what they are? It's just ether on the astral itself. So what's your take on that?
Well, one thing about Samhain in Irish culture is that was the night when the veil was thinnest
There we go.
between the ordinary and spiritual worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it was evening when it was most easy to be in contact with the ancestors. Now, Samhain itself as a festival, at least an earlier date for it would be about, at least back to about 1000 BCE, because the Celtic peoples, Gaelic-speaking people, were actually in what is now Bavaria around 2000 BC, and what was only after that they began to spread out into the rest of Europe, and out to the British Isles and even down into Italy. It was the attack of the Gaelic people on Rome about the year 800 BC that turned Rome into a warrior empire because it was that traumatized by being attacked. Now the holidays themselves is certainly Stonehenge has always been one of my favorite topics.
Mm-hmm.
And I had extra information about it because I was able to work with Fred Hoyle at Scientific American Books. I ended up editing half a dozen of his books, which was great because he had been one of my teenage heroes. And he was the one who determined that, in fact, Stonehenge was a calculator. It could and still can predict all eclipses of the sun and the moon. Now, how in the world people would have known how to do that 5,000 years ago is odd. The dating on that era has been changed because a city, a rather large city, was submerged in the middle of what is now the North Sea about 10,000 years ago. As the sea level rose again after the last glacial maximum. So Samhain, 5,000 years ago, represents the significance of the solstices and equinoxes. So those 4 holidays, as far as we know, are the oldest. Those are based on what was happening with the sun. The Celtic 4 festivals were based on what was happening with the winter, with the weather. Okay, that Beltane marks the beginning of reliably good weather.
That's the polarity of Samhain.
Yeah, and Samhain marks the beginning of the predictably bad weather. In Greece, shipping was only done during that good half of the year. At the beginning of November, approximately, shipping was shut down because it simply wasn't safe anymore during the winter.
Mr. Kelley,
yeah.
In modern times, there's people dress up like animals and monsters, disguising themselves from the fairies who might kidnap them. Now, this is the origins of Samhain, like the culture. And one of the things that were often spoke about in early Samhain in that culture back in the day were the puka. And the puka were menacing. They're like little menaces, but they also could be very beneficial. Can the puka be described as just the fae, or is puka more specific to a certain type of thing that the early Celts were talking about? What's your take on the puka?
Well, at least later on, puka became a very common name for cats. And I'm not sure when cats were introduced into Ireland. The Egyptians are actually not one of my really long suits, but as far as I know, the Egyptians were the first ones to have domesticated cats. And the keeping of cats, spread north into Europe and like that. I think puka is kind of a general name for spirits, and especially animal spirits. And that connection is why black cats are
the spirit of a cat is definitely all of those things, menacing and beneficial.
That's why especially black cats are identified with magic and spirits and so on and so forth.
That's interesting. I go to puka, you go right to cats.
And the main thing about trick-or-treating, which has practically been killed by the COVID, is that the children dressed in costumes represent the spirits of the ancestors. That's why trick-or-treating was allowed on the evening of Samhain. Because to give candy to children was to honor and give gifts to the spirits of the ancestors. That's who the children represented. And there always was a touch of that, certainly that I experienced as a kid.
You mentioned the veal. You mentioned the veal being the thinnest around this time of year, and while the veal's thinnest, we're talking about our ancestors, and there's all kinds of different variations of divination. You know, you got tea leaf reading, or you cast your Futhark runes. You know, back in the day, they did mirrors and scrying and balls and crystals, and the real popular one today is tarot cards.
Yeah. Yeah, and all of those can be interpreted, which I have a long thing about of understanding how and why divination works.
Why does it work?
Well, because of the strange structure of our consciousness. You know, we have really two minds. You know, the ordinary mind we're aware of, and the other mind, which I think of as the muse mind, is really far more powerful and important. And our ordinary consciousness is actually an artifact generated by the muse mind. Um, the muse mind has this dual thing. You have an individual muse mind in each individual, and yet there's a universal muse mind that connects us all. You have to have both of those happening in order to have any explanation. But there is an important scientist, Sir Roger Penrose, who won the Nobel Prize a couple of years ago. In one of his books, which I discovered by accident, he talks about the fact that we do not understand how our minds work. It's one of the most mysterious things that we face. And he said, you know, we will need a theory of physics as far beyond quantum mechanics as that's beyond Newton in order to even have a chance of understanding how our minds work. And I really suspect he's right about that. You know, we have not got a clue. You know, it's like it's like as if with a computer we could read only the highest level of programs. Like, you know, we can read the words in Word, but we have no access to understanding the actual mathematics and whatnot that are going on underneath. You know, with a computer we can see that. With our own minds we can't. You know, and it's probably to protect ourselves. If we could see that underlying software and try to make a change in it with our conscious minds, it'd probably just collapse the whole system. You know, so what divination seems to do in general is it distracts the ordinary mind and gets it out of the way so that the muse mind can get messages up into consciousness, you know, and all of the aspects of that mind, you know, which is inspiration, divination, intuition, creativity, and so on. Those are all interconnected down at that deeper level. And we have to learn to cooperate with it. Like in my creative writing major in college, a major part of the training was to be able to distract your conscious mind to get it out of the way. Many writers at least have the experience that you're trying to write and you're sitting at your keyboard trying to think of what the next word should be and typing rather slowly. And after about an hour or so, it's like there's a click in your mind and the floodgates open and the words start coming. And all you can do is type as fast as possible to try to keep up with it. And when the flow finally stops, which will take however long, then you can back off and think about how to improve what was written, whether it makes sense. But if you try to correct the grammar while you're typing, you'll lose the flow. But writers will have that thing, that floodgate opening, and you're not thinking at all. You're just trying to capture the information.
That's what we're trying to analyze precisely. Is how do you create that floodgate? How do you come in contact with that portal? Now we know that in 9th century, that these Celtic peoples, they would go out and have huge gatherings, huge feasts, and they had these huge burial mounds, and they would open up and they would see them as portals to the other world.
Yes,
And
they did.
And then it associates Samhain with bonfires and also sacrifices. Sacrificing what, I do ask. I definitely have to
Well,
ask.
mostly animals. Well, but we tend to, the word sacrifice, the roots means to make sacred.
Make sacred.
And what people would do with all of that amounted to saying grace. That you dedicate the animal you're sacrificing to the gods. You're also thanking the animal for sacrificing itself to you, whether intended to or not, to serve as feed, and you had to maintain, the right attitude, toward the gods, toward the animal, in order to continue to be able to have food, Um, the sacrifice of the animal in the temple was all in the context of providing food. The major topic in the book of the law of Moses, which is the central part of the book of Deuteronomy, is about sacrificing animals in the temple. Those animals were being sacrificed as food.
So that's kind of what Abrahamic law says happened. What did the Celt folks say? Is there any documentation of how they explain those things? Because you're taking it from a slant from an Abrahamic writing, but what do we have bestowed from the actual Celtic peoples that were talking about things like the Kelpie, that water horse that would lure you to climb on its back so it could drown you, and like all these little mythologies and folklores that are intertwined with Samhain? Where did those customs go to besides where can we draw that literature from? Because there's got to be specific folklores attached to it. What we do is get to the origins of Samhain. And what I don't want to do is get to the origins of Samhain by reaching out to an Abrahamic text.
Yeah. Well, you didn't have sacred scriptures in the same sense in the Celtic cultures that you did in the Middle Eastern ones. And now, as I was saying, the origin of the Celtic festivals goes back to weather things back about 2000 BC.
Sorry to cut you off. Somebody in the chat room just said that Abrahamic laws are borrowed from older pagan ones, so they got it from somewhere. So it's quite possible that those stories, you can almost say, are from a much older source.
Sometimes the chronology on all that's quite complicated.
Right.
Yeah, excuse me. Oh dear. I may.
Mr. Kelley,
Yeah.
Whitney had a question. Do you want to ask that question, Whitney?
Okay.
I haven't read it yet.
I can. I don't know if you can hear music playing in the
Hear you
background.
loud and clear.
Okay. I was wondering, like, where and when did we move from children dressing up to honor the ancestors and going out trick-or-treating to receive gifts in honor of ancestors versus the idea that people were dressing up to scare away the evil spirits, kind of like we have the tradition of the jack-o'-lanterns to scare away, the evil spirits. Where did that evolution take place, and how did the two get mixed up and separated? Because I had actually never heard that idea that you said of the children dressing up for the ancestors and trick-or-treating to receive gifts from them. I have not heard that anywhere before. So I just found that very interesting, where I'd always heard before that it was to scare away the evil spirits.
Yeah. I don't remember really where I learned about the children representing the ancestors, but certainly when you would get on the night when the veil was thinnest, that both good spirits and evil spirits could come through, and they would be mixed up, and so you would face the problem of how to attract and deal with the good spirits of the ancestors and avoid and push away other kinds of spirits. And not that I personally believe that there are such a things as evil spirits. I think that's simply an oxymoron. Yeah, that there can't be any such beings. Um, that they're an illusion that our minds generate for its own reasons. Um, Mainly to keep us safe, you from our own foolishness. Um,
Might
you
have
know,
been chasing away the Christian spirits.
well, yeah, I'm not going to go into that. And something we of course don't realize is that the wheel of the year, okay, with all what are now all eight subbits, combines the four solar festivals with the four weather festivals of the Celtic peoples. Um, but I knew Fred Lamond, um, who was initiated into Gardner's original coven in 1957. And he said it was about the time he was initiated that coven decided to include all eight of those holidays and put them together into the Wheel of the Year, because before that, they'd only had feasts at their Esbats on four of the holidays. And they decided they'd rather have eight feasts, and so they incorporated all of them into and created this annular structure.
What year was that?
Hmm?
What year did that happen?
About 1957.
So if it happened in 57, when did it? Well, in 57, the being public in 57 is a lot different than it is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know that in those days it was a hell of a lot more secretive, but when did it actually get public, you think? Couldn't have been 57.
No. Well, no. Other thing that happened in 57 was Doreen Valiente and Ned Grove hived off from the original coven to form a second one. And that created the need for an organization that had two member groups. And there was a new evolution that went from there. And they kept arguing with Gerald about his publicity seeking and wanting to make what they were doing more public. And they really didn't realize, and then a lot of people still haven't realized, Gerald's vision was very different. I mean, if he had wanted Wicca to be a tiny secret cult spread only by word of mouth, he never wouldn't have written his books. Okay? He wrote Witchcraft Today because he wanted Wicca to become a world-class religion that would stand up against, the claims of Christianity or any other faith to be the only true one. And because he didn't believe that was so. And he did succeed. Ray Buckland brought the first Gardnerian coven to the U.S. in 1964. Okay. 3 years later, we were not my San Francisco friends that we formed the Nerude. The new Reformed Orthodox Order of the Golden Dawn, if you haven't run into that, we started inventing our own version of the craft and having our rituals out in the public parks, which really shocked what other people around at that time, that we could be that public safely. But 1968 was the year in San Francisco of student revolts, civil rights marches, war protests, etc. And we could have this nice, peaceful circle out in the public parks and attract no attention whatsoever from the authorities. We were not their problem. They had much bigger fish to deal with. And I think it was our ability, our safety in doing those public rituals that inspired a lot of other people to try going public, which started happening during the 1970s. All right, and where was I going with that?
Well, that's fine. That's fine, Mr. Kelley. I have a question for Bron the Blessed. Bron the Blessed, Mr. What about? I want to go back to the question that Whitney had asked about when did we go from, dressing up to fool the spirits at that time to knocking on doors and getting candy? Like, when did that threshold happen? Did that happen in the 70s? Is it older than that? Where's that come from?
Yeah. No, the giving of candy is a late version of the tradition when it had been going on for a long time. The gift giving is part of the stories about things that connected with Cowan going back. I mean, you can read through the Irish myths in the versions that we have of them, and
That's
see
what I
this
like.
gift giving.
That's what's good.
The gift giving theme is all along. But that's because the idea of sacrifice, of essentially praying over your food before you
Right.
eat it. Yeah, you pray that to thank the gods for giving you the food. Yeah. And so the gift of the food becomes the gift of the candy as it evolves. Yeah. Um,
In the chat room, for those that don't know, Aidan Kelley was one of the original founders of the Reformed Order of the Golden Dawn. People
yeah.
don't know about that. We've made reference to the Golden Dawn a few times in class, and we haven't gone as far as any of the outer rituals that they were given for the original Golden Dawn. We haven't done any of that, but we've dived into the Hermetics, which I think that you're probably a candid scholar at.
Yeah. Yeah. The how we named. What began us on that was that I and my beloved friend Sarah often talked about what witches' Sabbaths would have been like.
Hmm.
And in fall of 1967, she was taking a graduate class on ritual at San Francisco State. It was taught by James Broughton, filmmaker and poet. And the class assignment was to put together some sort of ritual for the class to participate in. So she asked me if I knew enough about what witches actually did to help her put together a ritual. And I had been taking notes on everything I could find, especially Witchcraft Today. But I had that thing, and so I gave her a draft, and she and Broughton liked it and told me to expand on it, which I did. And then we got a bunch of people together to start rehearsing that ritual. And the question came up of, well, we're calling ourselves, what should she tell a class that we were? And so we played around with the name, and I knew that, Yates, whom I was doing my master's on, had been the leader of the Golden Dawn late in its evolution. So I suggested we build on that. And we decided we were new because we weren't the old one. And we were reformed because the old one was dispersed. And we were orthodox because we were trying to do it right. So all got put together as the Golden Dawn. And people who are in the other track of descent from that, who retain the ceremonial magic format, jumped up and down and said, "You don't have a right to use the name." And as it turned out, after a while, we did. We've got a set of manuscripts from two of our oldest members, then passed on to them. Ella Young, who had been a member of the Order of the Four Jewels. It was the group that was formed in memory of the martyrs of the Easter Rebellion in Ireland. And they had a mandate that people should celebrate the four Celtic celibates.
Mm-hmm.
And so I looked at this paperwork that my friends had given me. Here we had a written mandate from Yates himself to celebrate the Sabbath. It gave us just as much right as the other Golden Dawn people to do.
Hey, Mr. Kelley, hold on one second real quick. Whitney, you had a question?
I did. Where did the idea or the tradition of the Dead Supper come from? or the death suppers?
That I don't know whether it was a specific where it might have come from. I'd have to think about that for a while to come up with a answer that wasn't sheer guesswork. But it's quite old. And again, it makes sense as the kind of ritual you would work in honor of the ancestors, because by eating while shutting up, you might be able to listen instead of talking. Yeah, it's definitely a consideration. Well, other aspect of my life. I just got my 57-year chip in Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay?
Yeah.
And one thing I learned from my first sponsor, he got tired of me talking. He told me to shut up and listen. So ever since then, what I have tried to do is to talk almost at the beginning of a meeting and tell them why I'm doing it that way. And then I can shut up and listen because I'm not trying to think about what I'm going to say, And, being able to shut up and listen, is very much a clue, a key to anytime you're supposed to be learning on the spiritual level. And AA really operates on that level in a parallel way, and it's more accessible to some people than a Wiccan track would be, and vice versa. Um, honestly, some people are just unable to operate on a spiritual level in any tradition, and it's very sad.
You can't operate on a spiritual level by drinking grandpa's medicine all the time. Now, again,
that's true. That's true.
You got to be clear-minded, that's for sure. Mr. Kelley, what kind of food can you remember like eating to celebrate Samhain, like in the early days when those first like groups and covens were happening back in the day, decades ago? What'd you guys used to have? Pumpkin pie? Apples, turnips. Like, what'd you guys eat? What'd you guys make? What'd you bake? What was the deal around the circle?
Yeah. Pumpkin pie was always popular, always central. Apples, the bobbing for apples. Trying to pick up an apple with your teeth when it's floating.
Does that come from Ireland? That whole thing?
Yeah,
it does.
Sure.
Nice. I've done it.
Yeah, it's that old a tradition. I mean, it even appeared in the Peanuts strip at one point.
If nothing else, man, bobbing for apples. I think that's a really cool, modern, Samhain positive activity to do. And if it's frigid outside, you happen to be outside with your apples, cold for you, right?
Yeah.
Indoors. But yeah, that's definitely an old tradition. I'm glad that came up in conversation, man.
Were there any other ways or traditions that, like the bobbing for apples, that were done or celebrated?
Not that immediately occurred to me. There may have been. One of my problems I've always had to cope with is I can't arrive at information from both angles. If you ask me for the list of what we need at the store, I go blank. I can't remember what's on the list. But if you ask me, do we need beans? Then I'll say, oh yeah, beans are on the list. What else is on the list? I don't know. Ask me something else. And information this way, I have the same problem, and I don't know why. Just the way my strange memory works.
I do have one other question, if that's okay. I had heard of a tradition where people would also historically dress up and do like a parade to the outskirts of town to lead evil spirits out of town, or to trick them into, passing by people's homes and entering, or confusing them to stay away from people in general, I guess, to keep everybody safe. Have you read anything on that or have any ideas of options?
Okay. We've got two different soundtracks going here, and they're confusing each other. It's making me a little hard to hear.
Let's see if I can't take care of that issue, Mr. Kelley. Hold on.
Yeah. Okay, how are we doing now? Yeah, Whitney, try again, please. Can Whitney hear me?
There was, I heard that there was a tradition historically of people dressing up and doing parades to lead evil spirits or, harmful fairies and things like that out of town and to like the town's edge to confuse the spirits and to keep others safe. Have you heard of that or have any ideas of origins on things like that?
No. I think the idea of parading can't be dated, that it would go back thousands and thousands of years because it's an obvious activity for a crowd of people to engage in, to line up like in a circle dance and make a parade, through the local thing, like the spiral dance of doing, starting out with a circle and spiraling it into the center and then unspiraling it out. That's a very old form of dancing. We have that in Greek literature, that's the dance that Theseus led around the altar as part of the ritual of overcoming the Minotaur. We've got a specific description of that dance. So that kind of parade could be done for practically any reason. It's like little kids like to do parades. It's practically built into our psychology, and for practically any reason. Using it as apotropaic, anthropological term for warding off evil magic. That what occurs to me, is it's part of the emotional power of a fairy tale. Oh, crud, I'm spacing it. The piper who comes to town to lead away the rats, and he plays, and the rats follow him away. And then he comes to get paid, and then refuse to pay him. So he plays again and leads all the children away. Okay. that kind of idea turns up in several stories, if you're going to work the magic, have the shaman work the magic for you, you'd better pay him. Or you'll be sorry. Yeah. Well,
Sounds good, Mr. Kelley. Thanks so much for coming on to the core class, you guys. There was a good turnout tonight. I was very honored to have you on, Mr. Kelley, just to ask some tidbits and questions about Samhain or what you've experienced through the years. You've definitely left your mark on the pagan community, and it was a privilege to have you on, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Sam Dickens, thanks so much. Matt showing up. Whitney, great to see you. Amber's there in the background. We have Sophia from England, and we had a visitor, Linda. Please come back and see us again. We are the core class, and we will be back Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And we will have another class. Whitney, I'm going to get with you for a class for Wednesday, and we'll see you then. Mr. Kelley, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me on. Cheered me up some, since it's obviously a very hard day for me.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer being called Aidan, and in some contexts as Dr. Kelley, because I do have a PhD, and that plus a buck will get me on the local bus because I'm a senior.
Well, happy Samhain to all, and don't let the Kelpie get.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Harold.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bless me all.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.